on the myth that these subprime loans would continue to pay out and continue to have value so that everything else up the chain had value. And it didn't. And the reason that could happen is many, many-fold, and I go through it in my book, but there were rules that were abolished, not just Glass-Steagall being repealed in 1999, but rules that were abolished that would have contained the practices of certain investment banks, that would have said, you know, when you're at that table, you can only borrow 12 times what you have in your pocket. You can't borrow 30 times. And you certainly can't get to 44 times, like Bear Stearns did, and like Merrill Lynch did, and like Lehman Brothers did. You just can't do it. But in 2004, that rule was brought up from 12 times to 30 times, and then banks pushed the envelope a little bit more to get it to 44 times. And that's what they do. They push the envelope, and that is what we're seeing now. We have had, and I have different numbers in the books because there's different ways to look at this bailout, but we have had about $17.5 trillion worth of subsidies, of bailouts, of loan guarantees, of I'll spot your money, or you can use my name, i.e. the FDIC's name, to raise money for you Goldman or you Morgan Stanley, and a whole lot of different types of ways in which the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, kicking and screaming a little bit the FDIC, have come in and subsidized an industry with all of its flaws. And right now in Washington, you know, today, this week, next week, there's all of these conversations and hearings, and lots of people go up and talk for 10 minutes about what should happen, and then they all sort of go home and nothing really happens. But what stays the same is that now we're in a situation where these banks are bigger than they were before. They're bigger than they were before the crisis. They are more powerful than they were therefore before the crisis. They float on more of our money than they did before the crisis. They used to borrow from each other. When that stopped, the myth of the bailout was if the government helps to fund them, helps to get them on their feet, that they will somehow leak this credit into the rest of the system. And it's not like we want a whole lot of freeness for nothing, but you know what? Compared to what we want or we need and what the banks got, you're not in anywhere near the same galaxy. Because of that $17.5 trillion that's been subsidized, and some of those programs have been closed actually just in the last month, but all of that backup was made available. And a small portion of backup, a $787 billion Recovery Act, some fiscal stimulus, some tax breaks for first-time homeowners. There was a little sliver. There was like a 4.5% sliver of all the money that went out and all the money that was made available to help individuals who are at the bottom of this pyramid. And yet today, there's this idea of too big to fail. The too big to fail is of the creation of the government. It's pushed by the banks. J.P. Morgan wanted to buy Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual. The government said, fine, I'll back their assets, so if something goes wrong, we'll pay you. Bank of America was urged by the Fed to buy Merrill Lynch so that that bank wouldn't fail. Now Bank of America is going around posting near-record profits. Yeah, a year later, but it is backed by the government, and its trading and its risk has actually increased, even as the losses from consumers continue to come in. You know, as Lou said in the beginning, our data, our numbers, our picture of the general economy is not good. Ben Bernanke may think that the recession's over, and like in his mind it's over, I guess. But unemployment is still up. It was 5.8% last year before the crisis started. It is 9.7% this year. And that doesn't even include the fact that last year 14 metropolis areas had double-digit employment. Now it is 139. Foreclosures are up by 15% versus before the crisis period last year. And losses continue to come in. So everything that came into the bottom of that pyramid that supposedly was going to get fixed by this multi-trillion-dollar bailout hasn't been fixed. But bank profits are up. 5 of the 6 top banks have showed either record or near-record profits just this quarter, which anyone would if you were given a lot of money. You know, anyone can go to Vegas, and if they borrow enough from someone else, at some point it's going to work out. Now, it's a little more complicated, obviously, but that's really the sort of the crux of it. And bonuses are back. Goldman's on track to pay record bonuses. J.P. Morgan's bonuses are almost on track. Wells Fargo, Wachovia, which is another big bank that was merged in this crisis, are up as well. And not only are their bonuses up, their risk is up. Their trading risk is up. All the speculation they were doing before is up. but they're doing it with government capital, and they're doing it with more than their allotted amount of deposits, of consumer deposits, of our deposits that they are supposed to have. They're all at their or above their 10% limit. And the Fed, who is supposed to regulate them, doesn't care. So I have a chapter called "We Have a Bad Bank." It's the Fed, and that's a whole other thing I could go on about for hours. But I do want to leave you time for questions. I do want to say just before that there are things that we can do. We can continue to bother Congress people because they are the only ones in Washington. They sit there and they have their meetings, and there are lobbyists in their offices, and they have an inclination to listen to where the money is. But we are the people who vote for them or not for them, and there is some sort of a power in that. It's not as big as millions of dollars that might be thrown at them, but it is certainly not zero, and not fighting and not making it clear isn't zero. So I think that remains important more now than ever, because if any of us ever thought the system was skewed, now it is like $17.5 trillion more skewed. And that's not good. That is not a good situation. So I do think we need to consider we know that we have to have the government consider breaking up the banks, making them at least manageable so that all these little tiny cosmetic regulations that are being discussed as if that will make a difference actually can make a difference. Back in 1933, the FDIC, when it was created, would not have worked if banks had stayed mingled and risky and incomprehensible to Washington. Because it wouldn't have made sense to back something that you can't understand, whereas that is the situation that we are in now. And so we need to make banks more understandable, more fragmented, more divided into commercial and investment. And yes, we need to regulate all the derivatives and all the funky products that existed. This whole pyramid thing, this still happens. None of that has been changed. None of the rules have been changed. There's a lot of talk. There's been talk since November. Every time the G20 gets together, they sit there and they talk, they shake hands, they talk about coordinated economic whatever, and then they go home and they come back 6 months later somewhere else. So that's the kind of thing that needs to still happen. But I do hope that there's a lot more in the book. I do hope that you will get it and look at some of these informations. I also do have a lot of information on the website. There's a couple people here that have helped me do research for the book, and also on the website. Don McAdam is in the back there. He did a lot of the initial research and found some very crazy things that the Fed was doing that even I was like, really? They really said that? They really did that? On the one hand, it's very frustrating to write a book like this. On the other hand, it's kind of fun because in all the frustration, you get these like incredulous, like, really? He said it was counterproductive to know what they were doing? Really? And then he said it again? And really, they had 5 hearings about bonus compensation, and then they had another one? So there's stuff like that. Also, Zach Superior is here, who has been my media intern, who has helped with all the communication and everything along the way since the book has come out, so thank you for that. And who is not here, but who's in Germany, is Don's wife, Chris Ugren, who helps me to this day, to this moment, like probably right now because she never sleeps, with updating the numbers behind the bailout. So when I talk about them, they're actually all on my website. They're on Demos's website, and all of the information is publicly sourceable. I don't just kind of make this stuff up. I mean, it is all coming from the Fed or coming from the Treasury. It requires a lot of digging through the words. It's kind of not like every time some money goes out, there's a big press release. You kind of have to find them and look for them. But so there's some interpretation there, but she has been great at that. So with that, I would like to also thank you for coming. So many of you. I'm just thrilled that you are all here, and I hope you have some great questions, and that you buy the book from the Strand. And thank you very much. And there's a mic that's going to travel around to you. And maybe if you ask just like a really quick question, I'll do kind of like maybe 3 at a time and see if I can get it that way. Good.
So recently Eliot Spitzer was in the news a few months ago when the bonus scandals erupted, and he said, folks, that's not the real scandal. It's that your great-grandchildren's tax dollars are being used to pay 100 cents on the dollar to mostly foreign banks that own these